Again, have not pre-watched, know nothing about this. Let's see what happens here. Does this look about right, Lanzetta? Is this the segment you were talking about? I feel like this is probably along the right lines. Also, their breaking point set has gotten better. It's better than I remembered, anyway. It's okay, Drago. Oh, okay, wait, is this becoming a thing? Wait, before we start this, is this becoming a thing? Like, am I gonna have to cover, like, Vosh on Hee Hee? Is that something you guys are gonna want from me? I mean, I usually cover, like, when Ethan dips his toes in politics, but, like, is this, like, gonna be not cool? I feel like it's not, I feel like it's gonna be not cool. No, please, no. Vosh had a whole stream for it? They made a bad hit piece? I guess that's not surprising. Disappointing, not surprising. It's okay if you don't? Alright, I'm glad. Thank you for giving me special dispensation. Yes, it's time for everyone's favorite show, Krystal and Saagar.
Let's go ahead and get to the major news here in Washington. The border bill arrived and seemingly died upon arrival.
I will say one thing. Saagar is held back by the fact that he doesn't wear suits that fit him. Okay? If Saagar wore, like, better-fitting suits, he would be a much more effective fascist.
Negotiated by Senator James Lankford, Senator Kyrsten Sinema, and some Senator Chris Murphy as well from the Democratic side. Kyrsten Sinema, I guess, from the independent side. Shall we call it that, Krystal? And then we have Senator Lankford. Lankford being from the state of Oklahoma. So Senator Lankford appeared on Fox and Friends yesterday morning to make his case.
Oh, wait, the Vosh he thing went big? If it went big, then I might cover it anyway. I'm just not going to cover it today.
For the bill and to rebut some of his GOP colleagues who preemptively were rejecting some of the details. Here's what he had to say.
He said no self-respecting senator should agree to vote on a 370-page bill this week. Any 41 senators can prevent the bill from proceeding. If you agree that senators should have this bill for at least a few weeks and certainly more than a few days before voting on it, say so. You understand where he's coming from, right? Don't you guys have a procedural vote this week? Are you going to vote on the bill by the end of the week?
So we actually have this bill came out yesterday, Sunday. The first procedural vote is Wednesday. And
I have to say, I did not expect that voice to come out of this man. This man does not look like he would have a very low baritone.
that procedural vote is literally just open it up to be able to go through it and to be able to say, are we going to debate it this week? That's what Senator Lee is actually talking about. It's interesting that he said he's already opposed to it. He needs 3 weeks to be able to read it, but he's already opposed to it. Again, people have got to be able to read it, go through it themselves. Don't just go off a Facebook post somewhere what the bill says. This dramatically changes asylum. It dramatically changes
Astral
deportation.
Storm, thanks for the 2 tier 1 subs.
We no longer have a 10-year backlog. It builds more wall. Those are the key things that it actually does. But read it for yourselves. Don't just believe what's online.
Read it for yourselves. And many Republicans did and still have ended up rejecting it. We will get to that. But
yeah, I mean, like, at this point, we're several days after the rejection. Like, going over this is pointless, largely, but it's
Florida
fun
man
watching them
bludgeons
debate.
father to death after learning he got the vaccine.
Yep. It's almost like conservatives are insane. And when you drip feed them propaganda that tells them that vaccines are actually alien DNA, or that or that like federal officials need to be fought in the streets with tooth and nail, it's not really surprising that some of them will violently kill their own family members over it. Like, we've done... I feel like we've done that story so many times in so many different versions. Like, after Trump lost, the guy who, like, took his kids down to Mexico and, like, beheaded them and, like, killed them because, like, the deep state was going to be controlling America from here on out. Or, like, the guy who just, like, a couple weeks ago beheaded his father because his father... He thought his father was a federal employee, and also that he was literally God, and that by killing his dad, he was going to start like a massive uprising against Joe Biden. Like we've covered this story so many times. Like this is the after effects of stochastic terror. You know, this is like the knock-on consequence of rhetoric that pushes for that, right?
There's actually a good summary of this deal from Bill Melugin. Some of you guys may be familiar with him. He's the Fox News reporter who covers the border. He's very critical of the immigration situation and of Biden. So I think, his overall summary, I think you could take from the most skeptical point of view. We can go ahead and put this up there on the screen, and I'll read from some of it. So he says, quote, "New my initial highlights from the border deal. There's no amnesty and legalization of anyone already who is in the U.S. illegally. It funds an increase for ICE detention capacity from 50,000 from the current 34,000. There's a 7-day, this is the most controversial part, so please pay attention to this. At a 7-day rolling average of 5,000 encounters per day, or 8,500 encounters in a single day, the Department of Homeland Security, quote, would be required to shut the border down and turn away anyone who crosses. No new asylum claims would be allowed. Anyone crossing would be removed. It would end the idea of, quote, I made it to U.S. soil and you have to process me. That would be over. Border Patrol would not process an illegal crosser and they would be removed. No asylum claim permitted unless it was made at a port of entry.
Yeah, but by the way, this is just an insane policy. Like, my understanding is there's like already like on average like 4,500 encounters per day. And again, what exactly constitutes an encounter, right? So like if that average went up or spiked, it would immediately trigger the border to be shut down. And the process, I think, like shuts down the border for like almost a year, and then like can be renewed for like diminishing periods of time, but like would like shut down the border for like a period of like total 5 years if like there were encounters like this. Like it's not a real, like this isn't a realistic thing. This actually reads to me like a pie in the sky type of ask from Republicans that Democrats granted begrudgingly as an attempt to be bipartisan on this bill. That's what this reads like to me. And they still said no, because obviously they said no, because they don't actually care about the border. They care about opposing Democrats. That is the main thrust of Republicanism in the United States.
Pay attention to that because it's important.
Hey,
they
Puff
then
and
go
Joe.
on and they say, this does not mean that, quote, for quote, 5,000 are allowed in. Before the authority kicks in, single adults would be detained, families would be released via alternative to detention, asylum cases would be fast-tracked to months rather than years under a new rapid expanded system. Those who fail would be quickly removed from the U.S. The initial pass would be reviewed from work authorization claims.
Like, honestly, there were good parts of this bill. Like, part of the bill, like, required hiring much more like judicial staff in order to expedite the asylum process. Because right now, what we're basically dealing with, the reason there's a border crisis is because we don't have enough bureaucratic officials to handle all of these people. And so it's like we hold them in detention camps for years until they can see a judge to decide whether or not they can stay here. Like that's not an effective system. Like we could just pass a standalone bill to fund that, but that's not popular. It doesn't get people talking, and Republicans would just torpedo it. Because again, the point isn't making the border function. The point is cruelty. The point is punishing people who are from outside. We gotta punish those outsiders. We gotta feel like we're doing something. And in order to feel like we're doing something, we have to make sure that there are bodies on those razor wires, okay?
And 90-day supervision until final asylum claim is determined. Shutdown authority doesn't drop until the crossings decrease significantly in the days following that. Significantly, there are tougher asylum requirements and a highly credible fear standard.
Oh, sorry. When I was talking about the border shutdowns, I was talking about the proposed executive power that Biden put forward of being able to shut down the border. that had a rolling period that would add up to like 5 years of the border being shut down continuously. That's crazy. That's a crazy power to give the president, someone who only has like a 4-year term.
Including the 3 bars to eligibility, criminal history, could they have resettled in another country on the way to the U.S. called a safe third country?
Yeah, no, exactly, Jess. When Republicans cut the budget for the border, they cut the judges who deal with undocumented cases, who deal with asylum seekers. When those judges are cut, it slows down the whole process. And honestly, it would not surprise me to find out that type of legislation, that those types of cuts are specifically lobbied for by like private companies who operate immigrant detention camps. It would not surprise me if there's like some sort of weird loophole that's being exploited here, turning undocumented immigrants into essentially slave labor, much like we do in our other for-profit prisons.
And, quote, could they have resettled somewhere else in their own country? Just saying that you're scared to return home no longer is enough to be required in the initial interview. It appears that legislation would then move asylum claim decisions away from immigration judges and have them be handled by USCIS, which is the U.S. immigration system. Next, they talk here about some of the increases to FEMA, humanitarian aid, increase in the number of new visas that will be granted over the last 5 years to 50,000. Funding, and this is another important part I want to pay attention to.
Yeah, new visas, good. This is a good part right here. This is great. The rest of it is terrible.
To funding to hire hundreds more ICE deportation officers, Border Patrol agents, and USCIS asylum officers. It says no unaccompanied minor could be removed, and some of these minors would receive attorneys, pro bono, and are
This is also good. Unaccompanied minors need legal protection because currently in our immigration courts, 3-year-olds who are not accompanied by an adult stand trial themselves. They literally represent themselves in court. Like, there's a 3-year-old being cross-examined by an actual lawyer. You know, that's insane, dude. That's insane. And that's how our system has worked for like the last 30 years.
Taxpayer funded. DHS would take 90 days to have this new system before it goes into place. And the context that he adds at the end is that the border has seen at least 5,000 encounters almost every single day of the last couple of years. Under Biden,
Yeah.
so if the bill were signed into law, the border would likely be shut down on the first day that it takes effect. So, Krystal, with all of that and with that skeptical summary, I think, here by the Fox News reporter, it does seem to still mean that almost all Republicans have rejected it out of hand. The House...
Well, yeah, no, this, Neuron, exactly. The Democrats gave Republicans almost everything they wanted in this bill. And they said no, because that's exactly what has happened with every bipartisan attempt Democrats have made. Democrats cave, and then Republicans go, no, we don't want that. We actually want something even more extreme. You know, they want something even more unattainable.
Representatives say it's a non-starter and that it's not going to happen.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's pretty clear there. This is a bill that is very, pretty far in the restrictionist direction. It is not something the Democrats ever would have agreed to under Donald Trump or would agree to next time under Donald Trump. Historically, any sort of increased enforcement mechanisms have been tied in a quote-unquote comprehensive immigration bill with some sort of path to legalization. There is absolutely none of that there. There's a real... So I do want to say there are pieces of this bill that I would actually support, including, as we've discussed, I mean,
yeah,
one of the biggest problems is you have this massive asylum case backlog, millions of cases, so it takes years for these cases to be adjudicated. There are provisions in here...
And again, this would maybe be less of a problem if we gave asylum seekers or undocumented immigrants pathways towards citizenship. It would take the burden off of our immigration courts if that was the case. But unfortunately, we don't do that. We don't want to consider undocumented immigrants people in America, apparently. So that doesn't exist. But that would be another way to help thin out the immigration like the immigration courts, colossal workload
here that would help to expedite that and also would flood the zone with resources to help get rid of that backlog. I think that part is important. But there's also a sort of direct attack on asylum itself, making it much more difficult to claim asylum. It's already extremely difficult to be granted asylum. The bar is already extremely high. And then there's also, as we discussed before, this quote unquote shut down the border, which is a little bit misleading how this is labeled.
I could not
But
agree with
basically the idea is once you get to over 5,000 on average on a daily basis, and there are some provisions in there like the president could change that authority, which is the other piece, is like you are giving the president, whether it's Biden or Trump, massive new powers under this bill. But the idea is once you get
I mean, like, what I feel like the president is already very, very powerful. Do we really need to give the president unilateral authority to shut down all the borders in the country on a whim for like 3 or 4 years max? I don't think so.
To that 5,000, you basically sort of like end due process and say, screw it to asylum whatsoever. So let me just talk about the politics, because in some ways what's in
I'm not familiar with this show. What is it? Basically, these two people used to host a show called Rising over on the Hill. They got canned. They made their own spin-off show on YouTube called Breaking Points. And the basic gimmick of the show is that she is a left-leaning person and Saagar is, ostensibly a mild-mannered conservative person, but it turns out Saagar Enjeti is just a fascist. So it's like, it's basically, well-meaning. Would Krystal be like a liberal or like a slightly more left-leaning individual? I'm not entirely familiar with her actual like ideological like foundations. But yeah, no, Saagar is a fascist, and she's either like a moderate lefty or like, a decent liberal to the left of liberalism. Okay. And they talk about the news together.
The bill isn't all that important, given that it doesn't have a chance in hell of passing. The politics here are that Trump basically came out and said, I don't want you guys to support this bill. And the Republican Party was like, okay, we won't. And so someone like James Lankford, who, took at face value the idea that the Republicans actually wanted a deal that combined border funding.
Yes, she also does the Krystal and Kyle show. Yeah.
With Ukraine funding, with Israel funding, which was what Republicans were pushing for at the beginning of this process. Someone like him who, really tried to negotiate in good faith and really tried to give Republicans the like restrictionist ideas that he wanted under the context of a Democratic administration. He's left holding the bag like, hey guys, I thought this is what y'all wanted. But, the politics at the end of the day rules the day. One more thing on the politics, because I think this is important. There is a lot of Democratic glee about, oh, Biden, he's so clever. Like, look at how he called their bluff. And now he's flipped the script on immigration. And now Republicans are, look bad on this. And they're exposed as not really wanting to be serious about this problem. I don't buy that analysis at all.
I totally agree.
I agree with this, actually. Like, I agree. I think that's a good insight from Krystal, because I think that honestly what we just saw happen with immigration is essentially the MAGA movement pull Biden to the right on immigration. What we saw is the entire Democratic Party move lockstep farther to the right. And like the idea here is that like essentially Biden is trying to cater towards independents in the middle by moving right. And this is a situation in which he has, looked at the numbers and he's like, well, people on the left are already mad at me anyway over this Israel-Gaza situation where I'm complicit in the genocide of people in the Gaza Strip. So might as well try and move to the right to try and get some of those independents to vote for me. And it is deeply disappointing. I feel like there's still time right now if he recalibrated to like win back some of the support he lost from like Palestinian Americans, Arab Americans, but I don't think he's going to do that. I don't think he's going to change, and at the very least, he's not going to change fast enough. Like the press conference the other day, he inadvertently called for a ceasefire. That was pretty funny, but and was like a pretty big deviation from the White House's rhetoric up to that point. But like it's February already. You know, it's been months. That this type of recalibration should have happened like, I don't know, in December at the latest.
I do not buy that analysis at all. Number one, the border, whatever's happening there is still happening on your watch. And, you know, whatever I think of it, there are many Americans who find the chaos, and I think that's fair, who want to see an orderly border process, and that does not exist right now. That is still going to be the case. It is still going to be under a Biden administration, and so that's a problem. Number two, you know, in the last election, Biden versus Trump, we had that prior to that election, we had the whole child separation policy, which Americans were genuinely horrified by. I mean, it was terrible. These kids who were orphaned by the United States government, you know, the audio that was leaked of the Border Patrol agents mocking them, and all of that was horrifying. And Biden, in part to win a Democratic primary, he really positioned himself as being much more compassionate, of having this inclusive message about immigration.
This is true. Biden positioned himself that way, and it turns out he just lied. He kept most of Trump's policies when it came to immigration when he came into office, and that's one of the big primeval failures of his entire administration.
Saying he would be a clean break from Donald Trump. And that ended up being a winning message. I mean, I'm not going to say that was like the number one reason why he got elected, but that was part of the appeal, is it would be a break from the cruelty and the chaos of a Donald Trump administration. What Biden and the Democrats have effectively done here is just embraced all of the Republican arguments on immigration, just completely caved and effectively said, like, you're right about immigration and your model is the right model. And guess what? If you want a border...
honestly, ran the fool. Exactly. I agreed. Like, the best thing, if Biden was running or had a campaign manager who was half awake, the message here would be that immigrants are hardworking people who are coming to America to do work. And it would be combining or connecting that message with his pro-union message, with his pro-working message, right? That would be the winning, like, combination there of, like, making this connection between U.S. workers and migrant workers and, like, building kind of this solidarity between the two in order to, like, forge ahead, like, a path of hope for, like, the working class in America. That would be a winning campaign message. Instead, what he's done is said, fuck those immigrants, essentially. And he's just... that the immigration policy of the Democratic Party under Biden is now the same as the Republican one. I mean, the Republican one might be more needlessly cruel, but the basic foundations are largely the same. Like, he's just... whoever is managing his campaign and his political maneuverings is really, really bad at it. And also just, like, heartless. To an extent that is hard to articulate. It's shameful, it's a failure, and, like, I'm so upset and angry every day because my job, as I see it, is to get people to vote for this shambling corpse of a campaign. And that's good. That's a tall order, guys. Vote for this asshole who's ineffective, has horrible messaging, is advocating monstrous policies both domestically and abroad, because our alternative is fascism. it sucks, man. Yeah, maybe the message I need to, like, pivot to is, like, vote all the way down ballot, you know? Like, all of the good things you can get down ballot are great. I don't know. It's been part of why I've wanted to, like, open the stream the last several days by talking about, like, good things that are going on, like Harris County getting UBI in Texas, or Minnesota being able to get like a free school lunch and breakfast program. These are huge victories that we can get on local and state levels by getting involved in our current system. And I think more of us need to be involved. And I think that the more of us that get involved, the more power we can get between all of us. And once we have a certain amount of power, we can make sure that milquetoast neolibs like Biden don't emerge from primary processes. You know? Part of why I advocate for you guys to get involved in local and state election processes is so that we can build power together. So that's why I cover these stories. That's why I advocate for that. And that's where like I take the most hope right now when stories like this make my stomach feel like a ball of lead is inside it.
Border hawk, you are not going to defeat Donald Trump on those grounds.
Yes.
Like, why would you compete on who can be the biggest asshole at the border? You are not going to win that competition. So one of the basics of
I mean, I feel like calling him a neo-lib implies the corporatism.
Politics is to try to fight the fight that you want to fight on the grounds that you want to engage, where your strengths are. No, don't go to the place where he's the strongest, where if it's a competition of like who's going to be the most cruel and the most restrictionist at the border, there's no doubt that Donald Trump and Stephen Miller are going to win that all day long. So I think all of this celebration, oh, Biden's so clever, Biden's so smart, this was such a great ploy, is insane. I think it's cope. I think it's ridiculous, and I think it's foolish.
I totally agree on the politics. Disagree a bit on the policy. People can go watch some of our debates on that in the past. But yeah, I mean, listen, no matter what, like I'm a pretty strong immigration voter.
Yeah, I mean, like, one hand wonder. I agree with you there. The main point I will make is that in the past, the betrayal and backstabbing of the unions would have been much more profound and devastating to the actual unions, i.e. Reagan and the air traffic controllers, Like, I think that even with, like, Biden's fumbling of the rail union workers, like, he's still the most pro-union president we've ever had. And that's, I mean, the bar was ungodly levels of low. But, like, that point, I think, still stands.
I would say is one of the main, if anything still ties me to the main Republican Party, it would be immigration. Why would I ever vote for Biden? It's like one of those where if this is a policy where it's one of my #1 issues, and why would I vote for somebody who consistently undermined the immigration policy over the first 3 years, got dragged here kicking and screaming, and is trying to do this for a political ploy, which, as you said, is not going to work. Now, I'll take myself out of it and just say, who are people who are voting on the border? If you are voting on the border, you're a Republican. Like, I just want to break it to you. You are the #1 issue in the Republican Party today amongst the GOP primary electorate is immigration. Also, something else that has become very clear on the politics here, I'm curious what you think of this, is that in the past, excuse me, is that there was a major split on immigration in the Republican Party. Lindsey Graham, Marco Rubio, the Gang of Eight, by and large embraced in 2013 the idea of comprehensive immigration reform paired with some future border enforcement. Now, with basically the shutdown and the collapse of GOP support for even a bill like this, it basically means Trump has won the argument within the party. Even in this, it is over. The starting point for the Republican Party now is zero illegal immigration. Asylum itself, over. I support that.
Which, by the way, that's an impossible goal. No one is going to be able to meet that goal of zero illegal immigration. No country has zero illegal immigration. That's not a possible goal. It's especially not a possible goal with the border that we have right now. It's especially not possible when the vast majority of people who are here illegally just come on legal visas and overstay them. Like, And I find that this is an important point to make, because when you set impossible goals, that's not a bug for the Republican Party. That's not a bug for a fascist movement. That's a blank check. That just means, oh, we're justified in spending ungodly amounts of money militarizing our border patrol. That is, I really want to emphasize this, essentially a recipe to create your own federalized police force within the United States. Essentially, you get to militarize Border Patrol, and Border Patrol can then operate within 100 miles of any border or port of entry or airport in the country, which is essentially almost anywhere in America. Like, what he's describing is essentially a pathway for Republicans to do that. Now, I don't think Republicans would necessarily have done that 20, 30 years ago. But right now, under Trump literally was like salivating during the Black Lives Matter protests at the idea of having a private police force that could black bag protesters, to the extent that he used Border Patrol forces to do that. I believe that they were the ones in unmarked vans abducting protesters. So this is yeah. The Supreme Court already had the ruling that makes federal police immune to lawsuits. Yep. So again, this is like the almost like the playbook, like writ large, for radicalizing America towards fascism. And it scares me, right? That this is one of the main components that could be used to weaponize essentially the colonial empire of America against its own citizens. This is fascism coming home.
That, by the way, just so everybody knows, in terms of revamping our asylum.
Yeah, by the way, he's also, of course, in favor of not having asylum seekers. You know, just denying basic human rights to people, because of course he is.
Process. But my point is that this view was a minority view within the establishment Republican Party. And the way that you know this, Krystal, is that the U.S. Chamber of Commerce endorsed this bill. It doesn't matter at all. You know, why did they endorse it? Well, because they like cheap labor, but that's a secondary part. My point is just that the establishment centers of power, the big business groups and others, which combined with the Koch parties, I wouldn't say they had won the argument with voters, but they certainly had won with the establishment. To have a guy like Langford, who comes from that wing of the party, who did, you know, even he tried to negotiate something like this, and it just be nuked outright, I think that demonstrates like a major shift in immigration politics, period. I also agree with you on the Democratic side, which is, and this is where I actually want to know what you think, because for me, under Trump, it was easy to scream about child separation, even though Obama did it too, and all of this, and then everyone just conveniently forgets that.
I will say this is deeply frustrating. It is deeply frustrating to be radicalized on border policies about like kids in cages, and then like Biden comes into office and the media just completely drops that talking point, even though the practice continues.
Whenever it happens. But to me, the asylum and the images of the border under Biden just became so untenable within the system that they're trying to use past frameworks for the current problem, where you have 6 to 8 million people that cross, you know, under the Biden administration. It just seems to have collapsed within its own logic.
Well, I mean, the collapse is a long time coming and predates Joe Biden. Yeah. Because basically, I mean, to go back in some of the history of our immigration system, for a long time, the overwhelming number of people who were coming to America were single Mexican males who were coming for work. And there started to be a shift, largely driven, by the way, by our totally messed up foreign policy vis-a-vis Guatemala, El Salvador in particular, where these countries became incredibly violent and it was incredibly dangerous. And the number of people coming from those Northern Triangle countries spiked. We have not had a major overhaul of our immigration system since the early 90s.
Yeah, so we haven't
And
updated
so-
asylum law since the 90s.
Exactly.
That's right.
So we have a system that even at its, even when it was sort of reflective of the predominant type of migrant that was coming, it's not like it was working that well then either. And, it's never been updated to be able to process the number of asylum claims that are coming in. There's, always been this tension over, okay, who actually merits asylum. There's been a massive amount of discrimination between the types of migrants that will be granted asylum. For example, if you're from Cuba, probably granted asylum. If you're from Guatemala,
wet foot, dry foot,
you're not going to be granted asylum. If you're from Haiti, you're not going to be granted asylum. If you're from El Salvador, you're not going to be granted asylum. If you're from like a former communist country, escaping persecution, Venezuela, for example, you will be granted asylum. So it's always been very selective, very political.
Krystal is I've had a lot of criticism of Krystal Ball in the past, for sure. She's doing very well in this segment. I'm actually surprised, and it makes me happy. I don't like getting on other left-leaning people who could ostensibly be my allies, So I'm excited to see her, like you said, VCC TV, on the ball.
And largely broken, and the resources inadequate to deal with the number of people who come now claiming asylum. And that really is the core of the issue. Now,
I mean, she might be bad in other videos, but she's doing well here, and credit where credit's due.
The other piece of the issue is, of course, just a question of okay, but how many people do you want to come? How many people is appropriate for, how many people? I think there's a practical consideration of how many people can be absorbed in a nation at a time, given the amount of resources, et cetera. My number for that is much higher than your number for that. That's where we just wildly differ. I think we can agree on the need for the additional resources to process the claims, but when it comes to how many people should come into the country, I think we feel very differently about that. But with Joe Biden, what do I think happened that brought him to this place? First of all, I do think he had this idea of I'm going to call their bluff.
Yes.
And it's an instinct.
Yeah, no, Joe Biden's strategy here is definitely I'm gonna own them in the marketplace of ideas, but completely setting aside the fact that politics is a game of power. It's not a game of intellectually owning your rivals, right? If it was a game of intellectually owning your rivals, Marjorie Taylor Greene wouldn't be in office, okay? Lauren Boebert wouldn't be in office. Louis Gohmert wouldn't be in office. These are some of the dumbest human beings alive, and they are in positions of power in the US government. Getting owned intellectually only makes liberals go, "Oh, yes, well done, sir. Such a brilliant job." That's not actual politics. Politics is power. And it's power that Biden is afraid to wield.
That we have seen reflected in a bunch of European nations as well, among these sort of center-left neolibs, where it's oh, the right is beating me up on immigration, so let me pretend like I'm on the right. And I was telling you, there was a study that The Guardian wrote up recently that looked at whether or not that worked electorally, and they were no, it doesn't work. Because if people want an immigration asshole, then they're going to vote for the most, for the right-wing party. At the same time, you're demoralizing your own base. Biden, as we know, because of Israel and other issues, but in particular because of Israel, his base is already demoralized. This only further is another thumb in their eye of, I'm going to be even harsher on immigration than Donald Trump was, and I'm going to completely flip from the messaging that I ran on back in 2020. So I think electorally it's foolish. I think the other thing that happened, Saagar, is because you did have these, I think the project of busing migrants into cities.
Oh, it was genius.
I think that was very effective because it is true that, especially a city like New York. Now, I think it's preposterous, the idea that a gigantic city like New York, a city that in a very short period of time in the last century gained 30% of its population.
By the way, I want to say something about busing migrants places. The frustrating part of that to me is that it has the potential to do so much good, right? Like if you actually like linked up to like services that would help migrants like settle down and like be able to like integrate into communities and like start working together, like you could like set up a system that helps migrants like get connected and become like productive and like not have to live in like these isolated like enclaves, right? Like we have the ability here, and we're demonstrating the ability to do it here, to actually make the American immigration system better. It's just that instead of using it to make the immigration system better, conservatives use it to punish migrants and like their political rivals elsewhere in the country, instead of using that power for good. It's a very frustrating problem because, like, again and again and again, we're told, oh, migrants are a drain on the economy. No, the drain on the economy here are Republicans wielding power just to be cruel. That's the drain on our economy. Hundreds of millions of dollars wasted in order to be cruel to people whose only crime is bringing their children here to be able to live and grow up and like have a future.
Population and is a city of immigrants can't handle absorbing 100,000 plus immigrants. I think that's preposterous. But if people are coming with zero resources all at once and no work permits even to be able to provide for themselves, well, yeah, that is a drain on resources.
Well,
that's
and they
a
have the right to
difficult thing
shelter.
to deal with.
That's the main difference.
And they have the right to shelter. And so Eric Adams is going like, you know, I need help. What are we going to do? And Kathy Hochul is the same thing in Chicago.
You know what the great thing is, though? Like, because this has spurred a crisis in New York City is now looking at creating an entirely new branch of the government that would create affordable housing for people who would otherwise be homeless. And like again, conservatives will be like, oh, but this is an epic own on the liberal elite in New York City. And it's like, well, the liberal elite in New York City are at the very least now going to provide like free housing to those people. So congrats on owning them, I guess. Oh no, the homeless and migrants will have a place to stay instead of having to live in dumpsters, I guess. The horror? Congrats, you really owned New York by showing them that you couldn't do that.
Chicago mayor, same thing. And so I do think that that also impacted some of the politics here of how we ended up in this place.
No question. I totally agree. I actually think that's probably the single most impactful thing. One of the reasons, again, why I think it collapsed on its own logic is Europe is a good example. So back in 2015, if people will remember, there was the great Syrian, Afghan migrant wave across Europe, some of which they're still dealing with today. They had the same level of asylum law that they had.
What does that mean, Saagar? When you say some of which they're still dealing with today, what does that mean? Did the people just disappear? Like they dealt with them and they just disappeared? Like those people are still living all across Europe, but they're doing just fine.
Had to grapple with, which is like, how much of this is real? Most of these guys are military-age men. What exactly does this all mean?
Oh God, can I just say this is one of my least favorite framings that has gained popularity among like the far right. The idea that the vast majority of immigrants are military-aged men. That phrasing is designed to be scary, as if like, oh, well, they're infiltrating our country in order to attack our country, when the reality is no, they're able-bodied men who are coming here to work, so they can either send wages home to protect their families or bring their families at a later date. Like, yeah, they had to walk across like 1.5 continents. Yeah, no shit, they're going to be able-bodied, like, you know, working age men predominantly. My God. It's also dehumanizing. True.
mean? Are they trying to stay here? Are they really fleeing for their lives? Well, also they're from a war-torn country. Can we send them back? Like, what do we do?
Right.
And that led to, I mean, the rise of places like Viktor Orban, Hungarian politics. I was just in Vienna and in Budapest.
Man, I love that I love that Saagar is such a little Weasley fascist, right? That he immediately goes to Viktor Orban, one of the more stable dictatorships in Europe, and is saying, "Oh yes, Viktor Orban came about because of immigration." No, he didn't. Why? Of course, the fascist is running defense for Viktor Orban.
Both of them told me that the migrant crisis was the single biggest sea change in all of politics. It led to the first breakdown of the Schengen since the 1990s. It really undermined a lot of the internal logic of the European Union. Even today, there's some massive battles about it. And, Rishi Sunak, for example, he is under massive pressure from his right because of the asylum thing. Arguably,
again, this is interesting. He gave up the game here, right? This is interesting. Rishi Sunak is under massive pressure from the right on immigration. So it's not that immigration is happening and causing extensive problems. The issue is xenophobic conservatives are pushing their leaders towards more right-leaning solutions to immigration. It is a political position that is not really informed by the material reality of the situation. It's instead a political position designed to benefit entrenched power, which is what conservatism generally is.
Brexit would not have happened if the German asylum invitee thing had nothing. So the politics of it, I think, really comes down to the fact that the law from the 90s was just not prepared for what the situation was going to be. I think we can genuinely agree. In terms of the policy and all of that now here, as I said, it has now been and shifted dramatically to the right for the Republican Party now. Depending on where you stand, I think that's a good
fun fact. I love that conservatives just kind of gloss over Viktor Orban, like the fact that he's like been in office since like the 90s. Like he was prime minister in Hungary in 1998, and he's now he's a honest to God dictator. They never really mention that part. It's so strange.
Good thing personally, but it's an Overton window shift nonetheless. To underscore that, guys, can we put this please up on the screen? It's the actual whip list, which is the opposition right now to the Senate border deal. That what we see here in the opposition right now, Krystal, is that you have 2 no votes. Bob Menendez, Alex Padilla. Actually, I believe Bernie Sanders
also a no.
has been added to that as well.
I think Markey and there's one more that I think there's 5 Democratic or Bernie's and independent no votes.
A lot of this is moving quickly, so we're doing our best. The reason why this is important is that right now it is going to be very difficult for this to even get to 60 votes. The reason why that would matter is that if it's at 60, then it can't even, if it doesn't get 60 votes, it will not even be able to get cloture. The secondary thing that is very important to understand here, if we could put A3 please up on the screen, is that the House of Representatives has already declared, this is a joint statement from Speaker Johnson, Steve Scalise, who's the House Majority Whip, and Elise Stefanik, have all a statement that they've put out and say that the Senate supplemental says any consideration of this Senate bill in its current form is a waste of time. It is dead, capital D, on arrival in the House. We encourage the U.S. Senate to reject it. That, as I understand it, Krystal, is actually playing a huge part in undermining many of the votes in the Senate because many Republicans do not want to take a risky vote on immigration if they know that it's not. I mean, it makes sense, obviously. You don't want to take a bill. Already, Senator Langford, by the way, is under massive fire amongst the GOP faithful from what I've seen. Trump basically disavowed him yesterday, even though, plot twist, he endorsed him. Also, many DeSantis voters are passing this around. In his endorsement of Senator Langford, he said he's strong on the border. You can't even make it up.
I mean,
yeah, just as an FYI, just taking a look here because I was curious. Viktor Orban's Fidesz party in April of 2022, won 54% of the vote in Hungary, but 83% of the districts. That is how badly they have gerrymandered the country and tipped the electoral process in Hungary. There's no democracy there.
But this bill is strong on the butt. Like, this bill,
well, it depends on your perspective.
Compared to the status quo, if you're in favor of restrictionist immigration policies, this makes it much more stringent. It makes it, much more towards the Republican vision. And I have to say, for me, what this reminds me of is, I don't know if you guys remember, I know you remember, back in the Obama days when there was all this grand bargain, we're going to try to get a grand bargain, and which meant, like, cutting Social Security and Medicare, basically. And Obama came to the table with a deal like, here, Tea Party, I'm going to cave to your wishes, and I'm going to put cuts to Social Security and Medicare on the table. And because they, I think it was probably some of the same logic of
the famous line from that time was, the fever will break. The Republican dedication to stonewalling any legislation getting through while Obama was in office would break. They would offer them everything they wanted, and Republicans would cave. And under Mitch McConnell, they never did. The fever has never broken for Republicans. They have just continued an acceleration into fascism, and it's deeply, deeply troubling to see. Because keep in mind, Obama put forward cuts to various social programs. He put out, like, he got Medicare for all not Medicare for all, Obamacare passed. But Obamacare was a Republican plan developed by the Heritage Foundation at the behest of Mitt Romney. It was the Republican plan. It was supposed to be the bipartisan plan that Obama pushed through because he had a supermajority, but it was supposed to cater to Republicans, and Republicans just continued to say no. And I do not understand how, after like 20 years of politics wherein Republicans just say no, even when Democrats are weak, spineless, and offer them everything they want, I don't understand the doubling down by Biden, other than the fact that he's hopelessly out of touch and overconfident.
They didn't want to, quote unquote, give Obama a win. But also, the stated reason was like, oh, this doesn't go far enough and this doesn't do enough. So the Tea Party did, the work of people like me who don't want to see those programs cut, and killed that initiative. And guess what? That never came around again. And so, I think, first of all, it's very uncertain whether Donald Trump is going to end up in the White House. I think it's a 50-50 prospect. That's number one. There's no way he's going to have a filibuster-proof majority and control of the House and be able to just, like, do whatever he wants on the border. Now, he can do what he wants to do with executive action, but that's always limited.
Yeah, it's difficult. Both
in what you can do and also in the duration of how long that lasts. So if you actually want to, quote unquote, close.
Oh, sorry, just a few highlights from Viktor Orban's point of view. In May of 2022, Viktor Orban promoted the Great Replacement conspiracy theory in a speech. In July of 2022, Orban, repeating the thesis of John Raspail, spoke in Romania against the mixing of European and non-European races, adding, "We Hungarians are not a mixed race, and we do not want to become a mixed race." Yeah. Uh-huh. No, yeah, of course conservatives in America love him. I wonder why.
Close the border and limit asylum and all of these things. Like, this is probably your best chance under a Democratic president. Democrats, like I said, would never agree to something that was so enforcement heavy under Trump or under a Republican president. So I think this probably is their best chance if they actually care about, the restrictionist policies they claim to care about. Just to give you one example, this bill would more than double the budget of ICE.
Yes.
Yeah.
It would give the DHS secretary unilateral powers to deport as many people as he or she wants to deport. These are powers that, this is again, from the Democratic perspective, why I think this is insane. Like, yes, you're giving these powers right now to Joe Biden and Joe Biden's administration, but if Trump wins, you're giving those powers to Trump and his administration.
Exactly. It's empowering a fascist if Donald Trump wins. And that is currently, like, very much up in the air.
Are you really comfortable with that and the way that they would use those powers? So again, I think...
And hell, even if it's not Donald Trump, it would be eventually, at some point, a Republican president.
You actually, you know, back the rhetoric that they back and believe in a restrictionist policy, this is probably the best deal you're going to get. And I am incredibly delighted, especially when you pair it with Ukraine and Israel aid.
Well, yeah, there
that they want to, well, and there we can agree.
Yeah.
That they want to kill this thing and that it's quote unquote dead on arrival in the House.
I'll give you the case that I've heard, which is McConnell's an old man. He's either going to die or he's not going to be there very soon. And he's the only person who is standing.
You know, people keep saying this about folks in the Senate and in Congress and in various other political offices, but I'm genuinely not convinced that those people wind up dying. You know, like, my God. So, well, McConnell's probably going to die at some point. Yeah, that could be like 5, 8, 10 years from now. These evil people live forever. It's crazy.
And Trump actually encouraged him to nuke the filibuster in the case of for border enforcement deal. If we remember, for the border wall, HR 2 already passed the House of Representatives. HR 2 goes much farther than this. I'm a very strong supporter of HR 2. I think it's a great bill on immigration.
Yeah, Litch
Completely
McConnell
reforms asylum in a very different policy. Endorsed also by the Border Patrol Union.
By the way, this bill is endorsed by the Border Patrol Union.
That's why I wanted to talk about this.
Yes.
So I did some digging. I asked some of my immigration friends, I go, what the hell are these doing? Because I was like, this can't be real. Brandon Judd, who I know, by the way, Brandon.
Yeah, the Republicans subtly replaced Mitch McConnell with a cardboard cutout with a finger going just pointing down. They like raise him up with like a puppeteer from behind his desk. They just weekend at Bernie's it for like another 10, 20, 50, 100 years.
And was the head of the Border Patrol Unit. I used to work with him quite a bit in the past. So, Krystal, one of the reasons the Border Patrol Union supports this is because it dramatically increases their pay. It's not just over asylum, but that's...
Yeah, but I mean, what they wrote in their endorsement is this gives us like the strongest set of tools that we've ever had.
That's true. Yeah, absolutely. No question. But again, my case, the case that I have heard from those who say is, look, Mitch is going to be gone. We already have the House. We've won the argument. Now the senators are going to vote the way that we tell them to. If we nuke the filibuster for, many Republicans who are not named Mitch McConnell are very open to nuking.
Yeah, Kissinger was dead at 99, but like people kept thinking he was going to drop dead like 30 years ago.
Filibuster, and they're like, we'll just pass our immigration bill. I know you're against the filibuster too, so it's one of those where...
Maybe, but there's no reason why you couldn't do that. You couldn't pass this bill and then still do that down the road.
I think,
like, that doesn't foreclose the possibility to completely kill asylum
for example,
down the road.
The DHS secretary, gets unilateral authority. Well, Republicans don't try. They're impeaching him right now because they say that he's not following the law. For them, it's actually one of the reasons not to give the power to Mayorkas or to the president.
I mean, but it gives him unilateral authority to deport as many people as he wants to deport.
They think that's not like number would be zero.
It's not like unilateral authority to give them amnesty. It just goes in one direction. So your worst case scenario is, the status quo.
Well, if you give somebody a work permit and you don't deport them, that basically is amnesty, because when the hell are they going to leave? I mean, that's kind of the...
But
that's not amnesty, though. You can't say, oh, well, sure, they're not giving them amnesty, but they basically have amnesty. But it's not amnesty, though. That's the point. It's not the same.
I think just on a substantive level that I genuinely don't understand, and I want to hear your analysis.
Oh, I mean, Dianne Feinstein did eventually die, but it took, she should have retired, 30 years ago. And when she was elected into office for the first time in '92, she should have died then. No. But I mean, man, how old was she at the end? She's born in 1933. My God. So she was 90 years old too. Genuinely, I think there's a case for elder abuse by her estate, but whatever.
Republicans, we've covered this on the show a bunch of times, talk about, all these people who are leaving New York, going to Texas, going to Florida. And that's seen as that internal migration is seen as I think justifiably so, terrible for New York and terrible for California and fantastic for Texas and fantastic for Florida. But suddenly when it's people who are coming from outside the country, even though they're also just human beings, and by the way, immigrants, like some of the clearly like hardest working and oftentimes most patriotic people you could possibly meet, suddenly when they're coming from out of the country, when they come to New York, it's like, oh my God, this is terrible for New York. So how is it that people leaving is bad, but also people...
I think most New Yorkers are pretty pro-immigrant, actually. Like, you know, if you take Staten Island out of the picture, you know, most New Yorkers are pretty pro-immigrant, okay? A lot of people in New York are the kids of immigrants or are immigrants themselves. Like, yeah.
People coming is bad.
It's a philosophical difference, Krystal, which is that the first part, your people are lawful permanent residents and they're American citizens. And the people who are coming here are not. And in most cases...
But they could be.
Maybe, but, you know, they don't...
Yeah, good point, Krystal. They're not. But they could be. Yeah, we could give them a pathway to citizenship, Saagar. We could do that. We could just offer them a way to become citizens. And then they would be paying taxes. They would be working. They would be literally indistinguishable from any other working American in this country.
They don't pay taxes.
If they're allowed
Most of them don't speak English.
But that
they don't
would
have
be
any skills.
There are American citizens who don't speak English, Saagar. Oh, they don't speak English. Oh, well, yeah. So do wide swaths of like Florida, but you don't see people complaining about that. They don't pay taxes. They pay taxes. They do, in fact, pay taxes. And you know how you could get them to pay, like, other types of taxes, aside from, like, sales tax, that they don't benefit from? You could offer them a pathway to citizenship, during which they would also pay taxes. like if your complaint is that they aren't paying their taxes, they're not citizens. So make them citizens and they'll pay their taxes. It's a pretty straightforward proposition.
That would be an argument for a pathway to citizenship, to legalizing them, bringing them out of the shadows. Because, yeah, the problem, and this is one of the arguments about, like,
Krystal's making my argument.
What depresses wages is when you have people who are not legalized, who are in the shadows, who are being paid under the table, oftentimes, like, less than minimum wage and not...
Okay. I have to disagree with Krystal here. Because I've looked at the data. Undocumented immigrants don't actually depress wages. They raise wages in the areas they work. That's what the data shows. Basically, for every demographic, wages go up when there are immigrants working in the community. There's one demographic for which it does not go up, and instead declines by like 0.5% or something. And that is people who drop out of high school. It's high school dropouts. And we have a solution for that too, okay? Like, again, every other demographic of person generally has wages increase. I think the points she's making, I'm not arguing against what she's going to go on and use this to say. I'm just trying to put out the point that what she's saying is already like ceding too much ground to Saagar, I think. Right?
Having to abide by labor regulations. What you're making is an argument for legalizing immigrants, for allowing in more legal immigrants versus having this massive shadow economy.
I actually don't support legalizing immigrants, and I don't support pathway to citizenship for the vast majority of people here. And I'll tell you why, which is that as fundamentally is a fairness issue. People like my parents spent years and tens of thousands of dollars on...
well, you see, because my parents suffered, I think other people should suffer. That doesn't make sense. I'm sorry. You know, my parents didn't have heart transplants when they were born, so therefore we shouldn't have heart transplants now. Yeah, like it's a dumb argument when you frame it that way, and it's a dumb argument when he's making it here.
lawyers trying to get visas. They had PhDs and master's degrees. It's not that easy for people to get a visa to this country. You can ask anybody who's like me. I think it's bullshit, frankly, that you can just cross the border, just say, I fear for my life because El Salvador sucks, and you get to stay here and you get to work for 5-10 years, liably never leave. The other case, and this is, look, you can call me racist if you want. The vast majority of people arriving here have no skills. We're lucky if they have a 5th grade reading level in Spanish, let alone in English. They're not educated in terms of the jobs that they're going to take.
Not gonna lie, it does come off pretty racist. But also, we have a lot of people like that in America right now who are citizens. Like, we don't just like ship them off to another country. Instead, we should, the proper response to that is invest in education programs. Like think of it this way, guys. Think of it this way, okay? You have two options when confronted with this type of immigration, right? And the option that Saagar wants is to use the money of the taxpayer to lock up asylum seekers or undocumented immigrants, keep them locked up for prolonged periods of time, you know, or alternatively, use tons of money to pay full-time border patrollers to just go around the border to round up people, to have them locked up and patrol these new prisons we're building, and then over time deport them back to their country of origin, at which point they then attempt to come again. Right? You are spending all of that money on the people who are deporting. You are spending all of that money on the deportation infrastructure. You are spending all of that money on the prison infrastructure. You are paying all of that money for imprisoning people. And again, I need to remind some folks that we spend like $60,000 to incarcerate one prisoner every year in the United States. And what he's proposing is that we imprison millions more people on the taxpayer dime, as opposed to letting them do what they want to do, which is work and contribute to their local communities. Alternatively, if the issue that he's bringing up is that, oh, well, you know, they're all uneducated, well, then why don't we just use the money we would otherwise spend to deport them on offering them education programs, on getting them community support so they can like work and learn in the United States and then contribute more that way. Like, we have options, and that's the cheaper option. The more humane option, the more loving option is to just provide places for them to live and work and also provide educational services. These are cheaper options than treating them like cattle that have escaped from their ranch. Hey, Twiggle downtown.
I mean, is it really fair to depress like wages for the lower class Americans?
It doesn't, though.
Again, even the most conservative study found that the depression to wages was almost non-existent, only applied to people who dropped out of high school, and across all other demographics of like educational attainment led to increased wages in local communities. So again, this is a lie. He's peddling lies and cruelty. That's it.
Oh.
No, but absolutely.
I mean, the research.
It's a supply and demand issue. It's basic.
It's your assumption.
Man, I love that he's like, it's a supply and demand issue, but it's like, you understand, like, when it comes to jobs and labor, like, the supply of jobs is not a stagnant number. Like, the supply of jobs responds to demand. Like, it moves. Like, people can create jobs out of, like, thin air. Like, this is so bizarre to me. It's basic supply and demand. Man, I wish you'd maybe learn a little bit more about basic supply and demand then, because it doesn't seem like you understand it.
Is that there's some set number of jobs in the economy and that's it, end of story.
Yeah, exactly, Salmon Moose. The more consumers you have, i.e. millions of people in this country who are living and working, who are coming to America to live and work, create more demand, which creates more jobs.
It doesn't shift. So again, it comes back to, okay, then why is it a great thing for New Yorkers to be moving to Texas? Why is that great for Texas? Why?
I mean, like, we're not even touching, like, the economic fallout that would instantly ensue if, like, you were, like, Thanos snapped millions of immigrants out of their current jobs right now in America to do what Saagar is. Like, the United States would economically collapse. Our entire, like, agricultural sector would like cease to function.
And that them taking their jobs and depressing their wages and
actually,
ruining their community, et cetera.
Many people in my home state of Texas would say it's ruining their community, and it is driving prices up because of the supply.
Yeah, but they brag about, oh, all the moving vans coming here to Florida and to Texas. Look, but when it's American citizens coming from New York, then it's amazing and it's great for the economy, et cetera, et cetera. But somehow, even though it's just also people, they just happen to be coming from outside the country, then suddenly it's terrible. It doesn't make sense.
I just think there's a fundamental difference between a guy who makes $250,000 from New York and moves to Austin, who's paying taxes and can buy a house, than somebody who comes here with literally...
Yes. The only people from New York moving to Austin are people who make $250,000. Yep, good point, Saagar. Very, very good point. You're such a smart boy.
That's $0. I think that's so classist. Because
no, it's not classist. They're not. First of all, they're not from here, so they don't deserve anything.
Hold on, Saagar. Think about. But put aside who deserves what, et cetera, et cetera. Just think about the best interest of the country. Like, it's very clear that some level of immigration, and you can see it again when we're talking about internal migration, is very good for local economies. And you know what? What we have seen as a nation of immigrants is that in these subsequent waves of immigration, some of the hardest working people, most family-oriented people, et cetera, and more law-abiding, by the way, are immigrants.
Depends on the type, but yes.
Nope, not true. If you look overall, immigrant populations, more law-abiding.
What? Approximately 4% of the undocumented workforce quitting their jobs would collapse the economy? Yeah. Immigrants from Mexico comprise like 88% of the agricultural workforce. Like, okay, yeah, just hey, if you're a farmer, go replace 88% of your workforce. Get on it. I'm sure it'll be so easy. God. 5-head.
Than native-born citizens, not to mention, yes, when they first come and they're learning the language and they're new, et cetera, and they're bringing their cultures, we all know what the next generation looks like. They just look like Americans. Their kids are going to speak English. They're going to be 100% American.
Well, it depends. Look.
Oh, sorry. 41%. There we go. Yeah, replace 41% of your workforce. Go for it.
George Borjas, who works over at Harvard University, has done a 2017 fantastic study which shows that mass illegal immigration largely depresses wages for lower class Americans.
But welcome
so that's
to
number
YouTube.
one. I would say the empirical data is pretty set on this in terms of the laws of supply and demand. But number two,
I love that he's making an appeal to data and then talks about how his entire assumption is based on his flawed understanding of supply versus demand rather than any actual data he's looked at. I feel like that's so goddamn telling of the way fascists argue. That this is essentially like a slightly more advanced version of making an appeal to nature as opposed to like actually citing data to back up your point.
Again, is a deep philosophical difference. I think that the net migration level that we should have over the next 30 years should be 0. And this is my case again, and look, people will be like, how can a guy, son of Indian immigrants, by the way, my mom vehemently disagrees with me if anybody wants to know. And she also votes, so she can vote the way that she wants, if people want to know. I'll tell you.
Thanks for letting us know that your mom's deeply disappointed in you, Saagar.
Which is that in the 1919s and the teens, we had a hyphenated American crisis, very similar to the one that we have here. Mass internal strife, complete differences of opinion, people speaking German, people speaking Italian. They had dual loyalty to their old countries, as we saw during the First World War. It was a huge...
Saagar and Enjeti unironically advocating for, like, Japanese internment in 2024. Are you serious right now? Actually, we had plenty of reason to believe that the Japanese were allied with their country back in World War II, so internment made sense back then. That's insane, dog. How are you real? Like, I mean, this isn't even usually, like, Saagar is like a little bit more subtle about it. This is not subtle at all.
Huge problem. We had a massive foreign-born population equivalent only to today.
Yeah, Punky Gal, no one's saying that the current Biden administration is good on immigration. We literally talked about that. We literally talked about that. The difference is we're not putting all Hispanic people in concentration camps. Which is what he's basically saying, you know, back in the day we had a point in doing that, you know, which is insane.
Internal strife was solved one way. We dramatically lowered the level of immigration. We let people assimilate into the country, and for the next
You know what's really rich about this, by the way? When he's talking, what he's talking about right here is, like, the idea of America being a melting pot was, like, in his mind is like anathema to what actual being an actual American is all about. And he's like, oh, well, we fixed that by cooling down this whole border thing, ignoring the fact that, like, up until 1882, we didn't have any real official border policy in the United States. You could just walk into the U.S. and exist here. It's only in 1882 when we passed the Chinese Exclusion Act, specifically to keep Chinese people out of America, that, like, this started to become a thing. My God.
40 to 50 years, we had very, very little immigration. Now, that is my case for us becoming a cohesive nation, which can have a true national identity, and one where the foreign-born population, where it is currently at an all-time high, should not continue to be high.
Isn't accusation of dual loyalty like a big JQ thing? Yep. It is a fundamental premise of conservative fascist rhetoric.
With a orderly process. I will also say many Indians will be pissed off at what I'm saying, because I'm also claiming that legal immigration should go to net zero. And I strongly believe it, because I do believe.
Oh! What? I strongly and truly believe that no one should come into America is a hell of a take. How? Like, what are you gonna like Attack on Titan the entire United States? Just build like several concentric rings of escalating height walls? Like, what's your plan here, Saagar? Like, I know that this is a meme at this point, but, like, just, this is unironically, right here, this is unironically what these people think, like, undocumented immigrants at the border are doing. Right here, they're like, oh my God, look at all of them getting over the wall. It's oh my God, they're coming in. What does that mean? I didn't know he was that bad. No, he's a fascist, Hikigo Corgi. It's why I call him like a Weasley little fascist every time we talk about Saagar and Enjeti. Yeah, that right there, brother. That's one of them caravans from El Salvador. All right, hell yeah, trying to get in over the Trump border wall. They sit around and they think that, like, unironically, and they think if they allow no immigration, well, the problem will just go away. Like what? We should build the wall and have just like automated turrets. If anyone gets within like 50 feet of the wall, they just get gunned down by like an AI program. That's insane, dog. But that's unironically what he thinks. World War Z is unironically one of my girlfriend's favorite movies. I've never seen it. I just know of it.
Believe that our current sovereignty and internal politics is so divisive largely because we do not relate to one another whatsoever.
And that really has nothing to
yeah, we all don't relate to each other whatsoever, and that's going to be solved by cutting off immigration. How? Exactly. How will I, as a trans person, relate more to a conservative if immigration is cut to zero? How exactly is that going to benefit me? Am I suddenly magically going to be able to befriend somebody who thinks I don't deserve civil rights and should be like killed on the spot? Like what? How does that reconcile me to anyone who's politically like opposed to my existence? Right? Like that doesn't actually work, Saagar. Also, the premise that he's trying to put forward here is that like people are just too scared of Mexicans or like El Salvadorians in order to be able to connect with their neighbors, which I think is, by the way, granting way too much to conservatives who are like afraid of immigrants. Like, they're not going to become less afraid of immigrants over time in isolation. They're not going to go like it's not like we're going to cut immigration and suddenly like xenophobic racists are going to be like, well, you know what? Those Mexican people down the street are actually okay. No, they're going to keep hating Mexican people. Because it has nothing to do with immigration. They just express their racism and xenophobia through support of anti-immigrant policies. That it is a virtue signal to other conservatives. That's essentially it. Most people in America are not engaging with or really having to deal at all with undocumented immigrants. And when they are, those undocumented immigrants are fine because they're just normal people who want to live and work and learn here alongside the rest of us. Not to mention the fact that immigrants tend to commit less crimes than native-born Americans. So, like, they're literally less prone to criminality than your average American citizen.
To do with immigration.
Third world,
I mean,
is just not going to work.
Even if you look at like the political divide has never been actually less racially polarized than it is right now.
Sure.
And in fact, Republicans are winning. This is the other.
Wow, this is insane. He just got done with this diatribe about like how he wants to cut all immigration to zero because America's so divided. And Krystal's just like, well, America's never been like close, like more united when it comes to racial components. And he's like, well, sure. Like he immediately conceded it. That's crazy. Which is why I call him like a slippery little fascist. Like he's weaselly. He like collapses in order to like try and like pull over more of like Krystal's left-leaning audience. You know, I find this show hard for me to watch because I view it as largely a vehicle for Saagar to co-opt like a leftist audience and make them more used to their like a fascist argument, you know?
The thing with all this like great replacement, oh, they want to bring in all these immigrants just so they can vote for Democrats. Like that's actually happening less and less. And Republicans love to brag about how they're winning over this population, but also fearmonger about how they could never win this population. So that's another part of the conversation that I think makes absolutely no sense and is utterly ridiculous. The divide in this country, yeah, some are, you know, there are some racial divisions, but increasingly we're actually less polarized among racial lines. And, you know, I would wager, and I think most people would agree, that ultimately the country was much better for those waves of Irish and Italian and Polish and German immigrants. I mean, that's part of what has made this country what it is. And I don't see this new wave of migrants coming from a different part of the world in any different way. So listen, is there a limit to how much we can, bring in at one time? Just again, practically, if you flood the zone with a whole bunch of new people and that creates housing, there's problems. I'm not going to say that there's like, you can just bring in the whole world and it's not going to cause an issue. But I do think that there's something fundamentally broken in a logic that would say, it's very clear when a place like the industrial Midwest empties out and these towns are decaying and people are fleeing. It's very clear that's a bad thing. It's very clear when it's New York and people are leaving New York that that's a bad thing. But then somehow when it's other people who are coming in, which in a different scenario, if they, came from a different country, a different part of the world, you say, this is great, this is wonderful. Somehow that's terrible. It just doesn't make any sense to me. And I don't think that the studies back up the study.
Yeah, I mean, if you're in favor of like revitalizing small town America, you should be in favor of immigration. Like immigrants are better able than a lot of other groups of people to integrate into small towns and like revitalize small town economies. And like, the opposition to that is insane to me. Are these two supposed to be liberals? Krystal is like a left-leaning liberal, like maybe left of liberal individual, and Saagar is an open fascist, who, masquerades as a moderate conservative. Like the point kind of being like, oh, they're kind of doing like a YouTube version of Crossfire, except that I think that Krystal is tethered to reality, whereas Saagar is just an insane, like, fascist. Like I hate him so much.
Studies show that if you have a massive undocumented illegal workforce, that can be a problem for wages. Actually, documented immigrants, the overwhelming majority of studies show it's actually good for, it's neutral on wages. In general is good for the economy and helps for the like thriving of that local area. So that's why, again, I'm not like open borders, just, let's have an unlimited number. But I think we can handle a lot more than we have. I think it'd be good for all kinds of people, all kinds of parts of the country. And I also just think it's fun.
No, I mean, like, I mean that Saagar is like a moderate conservative insofar as like, he's the kind of guy you talk to and he's like, hello, my name's Saagar Enjeti. I'm a moderate conservative. And then you talk to him for like 30 minutes and like he starts being really coy and cagey about a lot of his points. And then like you talk to him for like another 45 minutes and then he's like, I really am a fan of some of Francisco Franco's policies, haha. Mussolini got a couple things right. Haha. He's moderate conservative in that sense, as opposed to like moderate conservatives who don't like explicitly know that they're being co-opted by fascists, which I think is like a significant portion of the Republican Party. Does that make sense? Does that distinction make sense?
Fundamentally, like, goes against some core American values, this complete attack on the asylum process and this idea that
very knifey duck.
We don't care if you're being persecuted. We don't care if you fear for your lives. We don't care if you're like, a Jew trying to escape Nazi Germany or whatever.
Well, that's not fair.
It is. If you're ending the asylum process, it is.
These people are not fleeing Holocaust.
Yeah, but
okay?
No, but some people, no.
Well, let's not pretend like even when people were actually fleeing the Holocaust, Saagar, that we let them into our country. Okay, let's not pretend that the United States actually let people fleeing the Holocaust into the United States, because frankly, that happened. We had boatloads of people coming from Europe fleeing the Holocaust, and we turned them back. We sent them back to Europe, where many of them died in the Holocaust. Because there were people like you going, oh, well, it's not that bad over there. It's not like they're fleeing some sort of mass execution or something. And it turned out they were. It's exactly the same here. There are people fleeing like civil wars in their countries. There are people fleeing like the gang violence in Ecuador. Like I was going to cover this a while back, but like there were terrorists who took over like Ecuador's main TV station and like took hostages on air. And like it's a direct result of like Ecuador like going to war against these gigantic drug cartels that are propped up by American purchases, you know? Like this is a problem we encourage and we economically encourage both, you know, we encourage both economically and politically with our foreign interventions in Latin America, let's say.
They're fleeing gang violence.
Yeah,
By the way,
but hold on.
Okay.
But if you end the asylum process,
Like I don't understand, dude. Like you're like, oh yeah, they're fleeing gang violence. Yeah. Some of these countries have gangs that are stronger than the military of their government. Yeah.
process, you are telling people who would potentially be fleeing a Holocaust, like, we don't care. That's too bad. We're full.
What we could say is if there's a future Holocaust, then sure, on a case-by-case basis, we can evaluate what's going to happen. And again...
Oh, yeah. You know, if there's a Holocaust in the future, after it happens, we'll evaluate. Oh, thanks. That'll do a lot of good, Saagar. Good job.
And I would even say is that okay, El Salvador. Let's currently look. Everyone likes to talk about root causes. Well, what just happened? We just had a mass election of a right-wing authoritarian president who threw all the criminals in jail and dramatically lowered their murder rate. That proves they are adults with agency. They can elect leaders who want to deal with their problems and deal with their own problems and stay where they are. El Salvador's problems are El Salvador's. Venezuela's problems are Venezuela's. Has it been exacerbated by U.S. sanctions?
Just real quick. In El Salvador, they jailed approximately 1% of the entire population. 1 in 45 adults in El Salvador is now in prison. And, yeah, basically, children are being left on the street unsupervised because their parents are in prison. Like, it's literally policed by the military of El Salvador. People are just grabbed randomly off the street by security forces and frisked. Or just imprisoned or black-bagged without, like, any kind of, like, you know, legal representation. Journalists get spied on. Opposition leaders in El Salvador are threatened with prosecution by the government or disappeared. But I'm glad it's such a success, Saagar. It's not surprising to me that you support all of those things. It's crazy. And it's wild because, like, he'd be like, oh, well, you know, the president of El Salvador has, like, an 80% approval rating. It's like, are you not suspicious at all that a dictator who runs a police state is getting very high approval ratings? Are you not at all suspicious about that? Do you not have any journalistic curiosity about that? That's crazy to me. Yeah, usually Saagar Enjeti tries to put forward this idea that he's a reasonable conservative, that he has, you know, ideas that could use, like, conservative policies to benefit everybody, you know, kind of this conservative populism he tries to put forward. But, like, it's hollow on the inside, and you can see how hollow it is demonstrated right here.
Sure, but at the end of the day, it's not our problem. It's not our fault that your country, if your country sucks, it's your responsibility to fix it.
But see, I just look at this totally different. I mean, first...
Oh yeah. Sorry, elderly and women and children. You wanted to leave the country you were born into in order to get to a place where you aren't going to be massacred by gang violence. But really, you should have been rolling up your sleeves and grabbing your bootstraps to pull yourselves out of the gang violence.
First of all, like, you know, we can't exempt ourselves from the foreign policy that we, up till very recently, were, you know, screwing over these countries, or the drug war that is one of the, you know, most critical root causes in making many of these places incredibly violent. But even if you put that aside, like I said, like, I don't see this as, like, a punishment. I think if you look at it through another lens of, you know, typically it's a great thing when people want to move to a place. When they want to move to Florida, somehow it's a great thing. You know, when they want to move to Texas, somehow it's a great thing. So I don't see this as like,
interesting. I'm taking a look at a New York Times piece right here. Bukele copycats who believe that his model can be replicated far and wide overlook a key point. The conditions that allowed him to wipe out El Salvador's gangs are unlikely to jointly appear anywhere else in Latin America. El Salvador's gangs were unique and far from the most formidable criminal organizations in the entire region. For decades, a handful of gangs fought one another for control of territory and became socially and politically powerful. But, unlike cartels in Mexico, Colombia, and Brazil, El Salvador's gangs weren't big players in the global drug trade and focused more on extortion. Compared to these other groups, they were poorly financed and not as heavily armed. He began to deactivate the gangs by negotiating with their leaders. And then, basically, they arrested the foot soldiers of the gangs. And when they did that, they did mass arrests, where they also arrested huge numbers of innocent people as well. So, essentially, they just shotgunned it. They imprisoned guilty people and innocent people. Damn the consequences. And because of the unique situation of the criminal organizations in El Salvador, that was able to be somewhat effective. However, I would like to point out that this now opens up El Salvador's territory to other more, better funded and more organized criminal cartels like the ones in Mexico, Colombia, Brazil, and Ecuador. You know, it now essentially opens it up as a prime new business endeavor for these countries. And they aren't going to make the same mistakes as El Salvador's criminal organizations. But, it's interesting that, Saagar doesn't really want to go into more detail on that. So strange.
Oh, we're being punished by having to clean up other people's messes. No, I think we should have a process that's orderly. I think we should have enough resources to be able to deal with the number of people that are coming.
Didn't the New York Times do a horrible detrans piece recently? Yep. I might talk about it. I just haven't had the spoons to dive into that level of transphobia.
I think we should have an ability, a system that makes sense, that lets in a certain number, that's not going to overwhelm the entire country. But we should, in general, see it as a good thing that people want to come to the
I agree, Neuron. Far-right dictators are trash.
United States of America and still see it as the land of opportunity.
You should see it as a land of opportunity. It should be. It should be a land of opportunity for people who live here and people who are natural-born U.S. citizens.
Yeah. You're right, Saagar. We should just melt down the entire Statue of Liberty. We should behead all of our monuments to things like freedom. You're right, Saagar. It's so strange that you would want that. So out of character for you, a fascist, to want that.
Citizens or a lot.
But I don't see how residents. But that's the thing is you see this as a zero-sum game, and it's not. It's not.
Like I said, there's
Germany for Germans. Am I right, Saagar?
A lot of data to back it up. Now, in terms of the difference between the Irish and the German is we were a rapidly industrializing economy which needed cheap labor. I would also say that a lot of people who were natural born hated the Irish and the Germans with some good reason because they were depleting their wages and were willing to...
No, they hated the Irish and the Germans because their bosses told them that's why their wages were low. Their bosses lied to them. It is a very old tactic to turn the workers against each other rather than uniting against the boss. That's one of the oldest, most documented union busting tactics on the books. It's like #1 playbook. You turn the workers against each other. We have evidence of that going back to the 1700s. Yes, he's steel manning old school, no Irish allowed racism. He's unironically going like, well, you know, there was reason to hate the Irish. Those red-headed, soulless bastards. Like, that's what he's doing here.
To work for much less than they were, and they were driving around their overall wages, which led to major labor disputes even within unions at the time. So that...
Wow, that's crazy. Oh, wow, you mean this rhetoric that you're spewing led to intense division inside of unions? That's crazy. I wonder who might have spread that kind of rhetoric and popularized that propaganda. That's crazy. I can't imagine who would benefit from that.
Played out 100 years ago, but that was 100 years ago, and we can say what it is. Today, we are not a rapidly industrializing economy or a rapidly deindustrializing economy.
I feel, okay, if I'm being 100%, keeping it 100% with you guys, I feel like if we went back and read old issues of Henry Ford's, like, Dearborn Chronicle, I think it's called, the Ford newspaper. Yeah, the Dearborn Independent. If we went back and read articles from the Dearborn Independent by Henry Ford from literally 100 years ago, I think we would get rhetoric and arguments indistinguishable from what Saagar Enjeti is spewing right here. Indistinguishable. And for those of you who don't know, Henry Ford's newspaper, the Dearborn Independent, was the second most widely circulated newspaper in the United States at the time. And for those of you who don't know, it was also explicitly a white nationalist, pro-neo-Nazi, at the time, pro-Nazi newspaper. It's wild that he would be making the exact same points. Adolf Hitler had copies of the Dearborn? Yep. Henry Ford, decorated by the Nazis.
Don't need a lot of cheap labor. The predominant amount of cheap labor that does come here and ends up work in places like home health care space, they end up depressing wages in places like construction and others. And there's also, we have a
citations needed.
Housing supply issue. I mean, you know, like, where are these people gonna live?
I don't know. Maybe we should build housing for the homeless, Saagar. That's probably something you also oppose, though.
But then, look, this is why I don't even like to have an economic argument as much. It's about process and it's about legality. For example,
it's so interesting to me because he's against any immigration. He's against illegal immigration and legal immigration. He's against both, and now he's trying to save face here by saying actually it's about legality and process. Well, okay, if it's about legality and process, then let's give them a legal means to become citizens. Let's give them a legal means and process to become citizens. We could do that. But he's also against that. So it's not actually about the legality or the process.
Example, and you're using the ones about El Salvador. Why is it fair that we invaded Iraq and Iraqis can't just walk here? Don't they have more right to live here than anyone in El Salvador? I would say, yeah, absolutely.
I would let them in.
Yeah, but
sure, let them in too. Give them a pathway to citizenship. Give all immigrants a pathway to citizenship. I agree, Saagar. Wonderful point. Except you don't want that. And to be clear here, this pivot he's making, he also doesn't want Iraqis to come to the United States either. He's against all immigration, legal or illegal. So he doesn't even want them to come here.
But it's not fair because they can't walk here across Mexico.
We do have special programs for, I think, Iraqis, but definitely Afghan interpreters as well who helped us in our war.
Helped
so
us,
absolutely.
That's the clarity. But not every random Iraqi who happened to live in the country between 2003 and 2020. It's just not. It's not a fair process that just because you can walk across Mexico, or if you're some Chinese or Haitian or whatever, that Somali or whatever, you can afford a ticket to there.
Wherever you black and brown people, yeah, you come in here making America suck. I'm Saagar Enjeti. Hello. That's my impression of him right now. Oh God. Oh yeah, Brianna Huffman. Yeah, Henry Ford was like really, really big on the Nazi Party. Henry Ford wrote an article called "The International Jew: The World's Foremost Problem." And it was published in Germany. And Heinrich Himmler, the main architect of the Holocaust, described Henry Ford as, quote, one of our most valuable, important, and witty fighters. Henry Ford is mentioned by name in Mein Kampf, and is the only American in Mein Kampf to be considered favorably by Hitler, with Hitler writing, quote, only a single great man, Ford, who, to the Jews' fury, still maintains full independence from the controlling masters of the producers in a nation of 120 millions. In 1931, Hitler said to a Detroit news reporter, I regard Henry Ford as my inspiration. So, Henry Ford was an evil, deeply evil man. Nazi Germany literally gave him their highest civilian award. God.
That puts you ahead of the line. And the reason that these are all men is because it is based upon a belief that you can come here, you can Western Union your money back, and most of these countries, just so people know, huge portions of their economy come from illegal labor and Western Union transfers from the United States. They're called remittances. There was a huge effort in the Trump year.
But again, why is that a problem? They're sending their money to their homes. Sorry, I thought this was America. I thought we believed in freedom. They're doing labor that directly benefits America and Americans. Let them do with their wages what they will.
To try and tax remittances, which of course the Republicans quashed, but it's secondary for the conversation right now. My only point is that it has to be orderly. I think we agree. But on the net benefit, I totally disagree that a bunch of people who cannot even speak English, the vast majority of these people.
Again, there are millions of American citizens who do not speak English. Here, just out of curiosity, number of Americans who don't speak English. Let's see. Almost everyone in America speaks at least some English, even if it's just a few words. In total, almost 66 million people speak a language that is not English at home in the United States, or around 21.6% of the population. Let's see. Yeah, only 8.2% say that in surveys said they speak English less than very well. Also, there is no official language in the United States. So, again, the United States doesn't require people to speak English because it does not have an official language.
Some of them don't even speak Spanish. Listen, I think a lot of people don't understand.
This may be controversial on the left. Like, I don't actually...
Yeah, some people don't speak Spanish either. It's true. Some people speak Arabic. That's fine.
We have a problem with part of the citizenship process being a requirement to speak English. So make that a requirement. I mean, that's the thing is you can't say...
But that's citizenship. I'm talking about living here.
But you can't say you have to follow the process. But then there is no process to follow and be like, also, I'm going to make sure that there is no process to follow. I just, I think that's fundamentally unfair. And, the other thing is, like, there's this assumption that everyone in the world would come to the United States of America.
A lot of them would.
And that's just not borne out by the data. Even among, there's a lot of focus on the, like, Central and South American migrants who come here. There's far more Venezuelans who have migrated to neighboring countries to Venezuela than there are who have attempted to come here. People typically, they want to, you know, if they're under pressure,
Hey,
first of all, most
kitten.
people don't want to leave their homes. And I think anyone out there could relate
True.
to, like, you like where you live, you have a certain level of comfort, like you want to stay in your home. So already, if you're like, I have to migrate, this is a pretty extraordinary circumstance. Then most people, the overwhelming majority of migrants, are looking to go to the countries that are most proximate, where, you know, again, they may have family ties or it just may feel more comfortable for them or whatever. So it's not true that if you know, open things up, that literally everyone in the world would want to come here. That's just not the way it works.
Well,
so, you know, to your point about like, oh, it's not fair that Iraqis can't come. Like, okay, so let's get them plane tickets.
Right,
but
they can't. That's my point. And look, Gallup survey 2021.
But they can't. But we're talking about what we want immigration to look like. So yeah, let's get them immigrated to the United States.
900 million people would migrate to the West if they could. Sorry, that's just not going to happen. And this is the same thing whenever.
But also the main barrier for them migrating to, again, the West is a very big place. Sorry. Did he just say
100 million people would migrate to the West if they could?
Snipe. BWA.
Very knifey duck. Thank you for gifting Chaotic Kitten a sub. 900 million would migrate to the West. The West isn't just America. That's America, Canada, the UK, like 20 different countries in Europe. Like, what? Okay. They can do that. Let them do it. The main barrier for those people being able to migrate to the United States or migrate to a Western country, however you want to define that, is that it takes money to move them from where they are to get to the place they want to go. That takes money. So, like, they aren't able to do that. We're likely not going to be giving people in other countries money to fly here and move their families here. The argument is, if they make it here somehow, like, let them live and work and contribute to society. Do I think America would benefit from having 900 million more people working, living, creating, laboring together, building a better future together? Yeah, I think America would be pretty fucking rad with 900 million more people in it. It's honestly just a question of building the support infrastructure to support that number of people living here. So let's get to work. Let's make America the city on a hill that people want to go to. That's been the entire premise of America. You know, at least one of the founding myths of America. So let's at least try and live up to it a little bit. Build the infrastructure. Let them come. Let them live. Let them work. Let them raise families. Let them have joys. Let's build dense, walkable cities with public transit, education with breakfast programs and lunch programs. Let them come. We put people on the fucking moon with less calculating power than I have in my hand right now. We flung human beings across the void onto a stellar object with less than this. I think we can handle figuring out how to let people come and live and work here. My God.
Sorry, that's just not going to happen. And this is the same thing whenever
but again,
it comes to
I'm
asylum.
not arguing that we should just like let an unlimited number in. I just think the focus only on restrictionism. And here's the other thing that I'll say is,
yeah, by the way, as if we lifted all of our like immigration restrictions, tomorrow we'd have 900 million people on our doorstep. Ridiculous.
There's this assumption that the more cruel and restrictive you are at the border, number one, the more orderly it's going to be. That's not true, because almost definitionally, the more that you're squeezing the number of actual legal migrants, the more you're going to have illegal migrants, because these are not people who are like casually leaving their homes. They have, you know, real reasons and are not going to be and haven't shown any deterrence based on the cruelty at the border or the restrictionist policies at the border. I'll give you a perfect example. After Trump instituted the child separation policy with these dramatically cruel images, I mean, some of the most like cruel imagery you could possibly imagine coming out, the number of migrants actually went up. There has been no evidence that the more you crack down at the border, that it actually serves as a deterrent effect and people don't come.
True.
That simply has not worked out in history. So even if your goal is like, let's keep people away, the restrictionist direction isn't effective for that.
The counter to that is that the reason they started coming back is because Trump caved and he actually went away from family separation, and he basically reverted back to the.
That's not the counter argument. The evidence we have is even with family separation, even with the cruelty being the point, people still came anyway. It did not deter immigration, which is what you would expect if that was the case. What ended, like, if you look at immigration numbers, what ended up deterring immigration was COVID. COVID deterred people immigrating. Not Trump's border policies, which again have been largely unchanged by Biden.
Original policy. The one reason, the one time it worked was during.
No, like his argument here is that we literally need to go back to like hanging gibbets. We need to like imprison undocumented migrants in like hanging cages and let the buzzards like pick at their flesh as they slowly die in the sun. We need to make it absolutely clear, if you come here, you will suffer and die. Just line the wall with flesh pits. That's his argument, unironically. Unironically, his argument is we need to make them suffer so much they don't want to come here.
Pandemic, when we didn't allow people to cross illegally, period. And you have to stay in Mexico, which I support that policy. But
that didn't mean that people weren't coming. It just meant that they were being dealt with at a different point.
Yeah, and that's great.
And the Remain in Mexico policy I have some issues with, but the general principle of we should have structures and bureaucracy in place so that the whole of the issue isn't being dealt with at the border, I do think actually makes sense.
Yeah, I agree. There's actually was a Trump policy at the time, which Biden did away with, which encouraged people to apply for asylum in their home country at the U.S. Embassy if they wanted to. Unfortunately, that policy was done away with, which I don't support.
There was also a Biden policy that would use this CBP-1 app.
Oh, yeah, because if you apply for asylum at the embassy in your home country, and then you wait 2 years in your home country, you can see the problem with that, right? Because you're requesting asylum in the country under which your life and the life of your family is currently under risk, and you're expected to wait years for a response. Yeah, like, people aren't going to do that. People aren't going to do that if they believe that the lives of their children are on the line.
Or something like that would allow people to apply in their home countries, which
Good night,
also
winners and
was
losers.
Incredibly effective, and which Republicans have, one of the things that they're citing as a problem here is that it would enable that program to continue.
I am not saying the Republicans have been perfect on this issue. In fact, they've been complicit, and in many cases have abetted this because it's good for big business. In terms of the wage theory. So that's what I would say. I am not a Republican stand here. I'm purely representing the interests, I guess, of Mr. Saagar and Enjeti. From I think philosophical difference is that I think mass illegal migration is bad. I think mass migration is also bad.
Yeah, I mean, you're against any and all migration, Saagar. Let's be clear. You don't have to do all the subdivisions of immigration you're against. You've already said you're against all of it.
For the United States, the foreign-born population is far too high. We need a long period of assimilation and of a strong social safety net policy. And I firmly believe that overall, that this type of unmitigated control and all that actually does a great disservice to people like my family and others who came.
It's crazy because we've been watching this for almost an hour. This has been we're at 41 minutes, right? And he has not provided anything to back up what he's saying other than, well, my parents struggled to become citizens. and spent a lot of money to become citizens. And I think that even in the face of evidence to the contrary, that immigrants are bad for everyone and make people racist and xenophobic by existing, and also have no loyalty to the United States and are hurting the U.S. economy, again, with no evidence whatsoever. The main anecdote he has is that his parents struggled, which, sure, okay.
To the country legally, and it is an unfair policy.
You had
and
the ability to.
Yeah.
And your family
yes,
had the money
that's
to.
right. That's right.
And
yes.
that's
not unfair.
How is that fair?
But,
How is that fair that because you had the resources to do it and you happen to be from a country where there was a possibility of getting in, that you're able to?
Well, first of all, nobody owes anybody. So in terms of policy, it makes sense that you probably want people.
Okay, if nobody owes anybody, why should... then what are you even advocating for here? Nobody owes anybody. Well, all right. Then we don't owe you shit. We don't owe you our time.
People who are higher skilled, who already speak English, and who are well educated, so they can more firmly and easily fit into the overall economy.
See, I don't really
that's number
accept
one.
that.
Well, but that's a difference, and then I don't think anybody has a right to come here.
So
and in fact, my net is that nobody has a right to come here.
Here's
Oh, okay. So nobody has a right to be here, so we can just deport American citizens. Why not adopt the UK's policy of deportations to Rwanda? You know, if no one has the right to be here, then I guess it's time to start deporting American citizens, I guess. Right? Like that's his argument, right?
what I would say.
Yeah.
I do think mass illegal migration is a problem.
Yes.
Not knowing who's coming in, having chaos at the border, having people who are being paid under the table and who could, you know, because they're working in the shadows, that can depress wages, no doubt. That is for sure an issue. Having a, you know, significant level of legal migration where people have a path where you can put the requirement, okay, they have to speak English or whatever. I think that is net and throughout history has shown to be net beneficial to America. I think it's a core part of why America has been as, you know, economically successful and as vibrant and thriving and innovative as it has been throughout history. So I just, you know, and there isn't evidence that legal immigrants negatively impact wages for anyone, as I said before. So as a population, they tend to be overall more law-abiding. That's what the numbers show. Tend to be some of the hardest working people in the entire country. And actually, you know, oftentimes tend to have a lot of conservative values that Republicans are excited to, you know, crow about and try to win over when it's convenient for them politically.
No question. You're right. I think immigration has obviously been a net positive to America. Wouldn't be here without it.
Yeah.
Throughout the past, but I would also...
Immigration's been a net positive to America right up until I got here with my family.
Snipe.
Man, that's so convenient. It's so convenient. You were the last net positive immigrant, Saagar. That's crazy. And now you're against all future immigrants. The crazy stuff. Very knifey duck. Thank you for gifting a sub to Valhalla Vidya. That is very kind of you. I appreciate it.
Again, I would say that periods of great migration were also followed by periods of great shutdowns. And I think there was deep wisdom in that because it allowed for assimilation. It allowed for the benefit.
Yeah, there were periods of great migration, like all of North American history until 1882. You're so true, King.
Fit of that industrialization before we had overall changes to our laws, the Immigration and Naturalization Act of 1965, which by and large has not changed and I think dramatically should change. We currently have a chain migration-based system where if you happen to have a relative here, it's easier to migrate, which is nuts because it all should be merit-based, which is...
Well, wait, no, chain migration makes total sense because then the people who are coming here have a support network. That's the entire premise of chain migration, is that when you get here, you have other people who can help look out for you in the community and like be a somewhat of a safety net for you to get your start here. Like that's the entire premise of that. It makes total and complete sense.
is what I
I don't think
support.
that's nuts.
Um,
I think it makes sense that if
well,
you have,
that's
I
the
mean, this
difference.
is again like a tradition in America, is if, you know, people who are in your family come and then they sort of set up, and then you have a support
Yeah,
system that
Just
you
because
can
it
come and
exists
tie
doesn't mean
into.
it's good.
Krystal,
I mean, to me,
yes.
it makes some sense.
Sure. I mean, look, it has its proponents. That's why it's been the law of the land for the last 50 years. What I would say is I think we should move, like Australia, Canada, and many other Western developed countries, to a dramatically merit-based immigration system with a point-based in terms of the criteria we've talked about, being able to speak English, et cetera. But that belies the fact that it's not going to be fair. It's not fair because immigration shouldn't be fair. Not everybody should have an equal right to immigrate.
Why not? Why should it not be fair? Like, again, this is he says these things, but he doesn't really explain why. And when he does try to explain why, he doesn't use any actual data. Which is, by the way, a pretty common feature for, like, fascists, right? Like, they argue from intuition. They argue from you know, the laws of nature. They argue from, it just feels funny. It just doesn't feel right. His source is, well, you know, more deserving people should come here because that intuitively makes more sense to me, ignoring the fact that, like, why? Just allow more people to come in. Give them a pathway to become official citizenship. Open up the doors. Why? Why keep them closed? His source is literally fascist vibes. It's true.
Or go anywhere. And I don't have an equal right to set foot in any country. Whenever I go through passport control, any country in the world can deny me if they want to. I don't care. I don't have a problem with that.
But Saagar, you know the
When I go
reality.
to Poland or whatever.
You know the reality is, because we are relatively well off and American, we pretty much can go wherever we want.
Mostly,
We
yes.
pretty much can go
Mostly.
whatever we want. So what you're advocating for is a policy where basically, like, rich people can come and poor people can't. And I, you know, even outside of the fairness, I don't actually think that that is the ideal migration system, because again, I think it's classist. I think it ignores the skills and the abilities that, you know, people who happen to have been born in the wrong country and to the wrong set of parents, that they can bring to the table. And I think that's demonstrated by the strength of America through migration throughout our history.
My care for the poor and the lower class extends to the borders of the United States. For everybody beyond that, I hope for the best for you, but it's not my problem. And that can sound harsh if you want, but I've seen enough of the world to know that there is so much suffering that is out there that there's absolutely nothing I can do about it. My parents are from India. I feel no obligation to street urchins in India. I think that's the Indian government's problem. I think it's really sad. I've seen a lot of them, you know, in horrible sanitary conditions, but I believe that the number is so vast and so grand that there's a certain hubris to the extent that we can think that we can extend those rights and benefits to everybody.
And that's where you and I are just fundamentally different.
And
because the fact that we can't solve every problem for every person in the world does not harden my heart to being able to do what we can within the bounds of things that, again, are actually good for our country and have been shown to be good for our country over time. And the last thing I'll just go back to, it doesn't make any sense to me that when New Yorkers are fleeing to Texas, oh my God, this is terrible for New York. But when migrants who, again, over time, law-abiding, more law-abiding than the native-born population, hardworking, have gone through hell in order to get here, are going to probably be way more patriotic than your average American. But when they come, suddenly it's a disaster and it's terrible for the state. It just doesn't make sense to me.
Well, public opinion doesn't agree with you. I can at least say that.
I don't know about that. I think there are a lot of Americans who are very committed to the basic concept of America as a nation of immigrants who, you know.
Yeah, no, 100%. I think Krystal is right here. I think that there are a lot of weaselly worded, like, polls that are done that dissuade people from answering that they support immigration or immigrants. You know, there are a lot of scare tactic pollsters out there who will frame questions as, like, you know, there's an invasion on the southern border. You know, like, you know, the conservative rhetoric you see, like, is designed to scare people about immigrants. But I think if you just ask people straight up, do you think immigrants make America a better place? Almost universally, the answer is going to be yes.
I mean, this is, again, Biden ran on this last time around and he won the presidency. And I think it's foolish for him to completely abandon the more inclusive messaging, not, you know, any sort of radical open borders thing, but just more inclusive messaging, values-based messaging.
I will say, very knifey duck, Krystal Ball has been so much better in this segment than I have seen her in a long time. I'm wondering if she's like undergone a bit of a change, like politically, of some kind, because this is a lot more pushback than I've seen her give to some of Saagar's worst talking points. Usually it goes kind of like just kind of this silent, yeah, that really is a problem, moving on kind of thing, you know? I think that she's gotten a lot better, and I don't know if that's a recent thing. I don't watch a lot of Breaking Points, so I don't know if that's recent or like consistent. Like maybe if we watched another segment from like that week, like it would not be as good. But like she's doing really well in this video, and I want to give credit where it's due, you know?
Messaging that helped him win the White House. I think it's a dramatic political mistake.
We'll see. We've been going for an hour, I believe. So if people want to leave a comment and let us know, I hope that it was worth the time. And I think it was valuable. I think people should be able to hear these different perspectives.
Hey guys, if you like that video,
yeah, you know, I think that was a lot better than I was expecting from Breaking Points. A lot better than I was expecting from Krystal Ball, and also fuck Saagar and Enjeti, man. What a weaselly little turd.